Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bauman. Our guest in this half hour is Brad Bauman, no relation. Except he worked for me for a couple of horrible years, which have probably tinged his psyche to no end. Brad, the other Brad, I mean, is a progressive media strategist, is a principal in the Raben Group. We're going to continue our discussion we had in the first half hour, which was a preview of the Trump administration. It's finally getting to be that time, unfortunately. And by the way, I wrote an article, column for The Hill, which came out late last week, which was for how Democrats and progressives should deal with the Trump administration. If you want to read it, you can see all my columns in The Hill at muckrack.com/Brad Bannon. And in that column, my three points were: one, don't underestimate Donald Trump. He's more than a colorful buffoon. He's an evil genius. Second, I propose the creation of a Democratic Truth Squad that would include relatively young Democrats, members of Congress and governors. And third, remember to hit high and hit hard against Trump's corporate overlords. With that, our guest again in this half hour is Brad Bauman, the progressive media strategist and principal in the Raben Group. Welcome back to Deadline DC, Brad. I see you weren't deterred by your first experience on the show last year.
Brad, let me tell you something. Between coming on this show, getting to see you again, spending a little bit more time again, I am having a grand old time. And let me just let you know that the couple years where I was working with you, some of the fondest memories that I have working in politics. You were a great boss.
A straight face, apparently, which is why you're a media strategist, obviously. Okay, anyway. Let's start. People, Democrats and progressives have been dreading this moment for a long time. It's finally going to come to fruition a week from today. And so my first question to you is, Brad, how bad is this going to be?
It's going to be very bad. And the truth is that we've got to do a couple of things, Brad. And I'm really glad to hear kind of what your prescriptions were in your op-ed last week, because we can't continue on over the next few years as though we should be expecting the regular course of business to take place. We are set up for a 4-year run that will challenge every notion that we have as progressives about what government is, about what government should be, about what government can and cannot do, about what the guardrails on our democracy are. And the truth is that Team Progressive, Team Democrat, we all need to actually look at what it is we're doing in a very systemic way. We need to start challenging the status quo within our party. We are not in a position where we can go along and get along anymore. And if we're not thinking about altering, radically changing, figuring out new and better ways in which our party operates, the party as we know it might not exist, because we are in an existential moment. So we all got to start thinking about new and fresh.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Some things really disturb me about the election. I got into politics because of my grandfather, who was a political operative in Rhode Island where I grew up. And he adored Franklin Roosevelt Jr. He was classic New Dealer, Irish Catholic Union member. He certainly represented a big part of the FDR coalition. And one of the things that really disturbed me about the election, and this comes, starting election night, I started looking at the exit polls. And one of the things that discouraged me at most is that among all voters who lived in households of less than 50,000, making less than $50,000 annually, uh, Harris got 52% of the vote. And that's all low income voters, white, black, Hispanic, whatever. And I looked at that and I said, my grandfather must be spinning around in his grave. What happened?
So I think that there's a combination of like three things that I can point to that we know happened. The first is that the vast majority of Americans of all races, religions, of even in certain race demographics, are saying and have been saying that America does not work for them anymore. They see the institutions of America that have been set up and they feel that there are two sets of rules, that there's a set of rules for the powerful and that there are a set of rules for them. And that is a starting place for what the problem is. The second thing that's happening is that they now see the Democratic Party as the defender of a system that doesn't work in their favor, that doesn't work for them anymore. And they're able to feel that way because of the third, which is that the Democratic Party, by and large, is not a presence in people's lives the way that the Republican Party and Republican messaging is. I don't even want to talk about where folks in younger demographics are getting their information. Let's just talk about, America writ large. For a vast majority of Americans, Fox News or Business News or even Newsmax now, or, some of these other cable news networks are the background noise of their lives. When they walk into a restaurant or a bar, it's what's on at the restaurant or bar. When they're in their cars, they're listening to AM radio. When they are at home just looking at things, they've got this on in the background and they're reading or they're getting memes from their friends and relatives, and they're all conservative leaning. All of these things have combined with the fact that the Democratic Party as a whole at the state, county levels are tragically under-resourced. Most of these folks don't really know folks who identify as Democrats or liberals. And if they do know folks who identify as liberals or Democrats, it's usually family members who've decamped from their towns and have moved to Boston or New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. So our challenge within that entire ecosystem that I just laid out are to find solutions and to find ways in which we can again start rebuilding our state parties, start rebuilding our county parties, start making sure that the Democratic Party is again a visible presence in people's neighborhoods, that there's a permission structure, that they're saying to themselves, you know what, I'm not sure about the Democratic Party, but I know Bob, and Bob's not a bad guy. And this is the level and the extent to which the problem is. And that's not going to be solved with millions of dollars in paid ads. That's not going to be solved by waiting around for, the next candidate that we can all, kind of wrap our arms around and hope is going to be enough to cobble together a coalition. And that's what I mean when I say we need to really rethink everything that we're doing. We've got to get real granular here about what our problems are, and we need to start finding solutions to them.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, let me ask you the obvious follow-up question. Is the Democratic Party, uh, as it's constructed currently, capable of adapting and changes? I mean, we have a young speaker in Hakeem Jeffries, which I think is great. We had a famous internal Democratic caucus battle in the House where Jerry Connolly beat amongst younger AOC. And so the question is the party constructed to make those changes and adaptations you think it needs to meet? And I think you're right about that.
So,
You know what? I'm going to have to interrupt you because
by
we're
all
going
means,
to break, and we can get back to that question
it's a
when we get.
cliffhanger.
Yeah, cliffhanger, exactly. Cliffhangers are good. It's just like when people waited to find out if JR was dead back in the day. Anyway, we're going to take a break now. Our guest in this half hour is progressive media strategist Brad Bauman. We're going to continue this discussion with Brad and Brad when we get back to Deadline DC. So don't go anywhere. There's a lot of fun and adventure, and we'll answer to the big cliffhanger when we get back. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Brad Bauman, a progressive media strategist and a principal at the Raben Group. When we broke, I asked you, without giving you time to answer the question, is the Democratic Party constitutionally able to make the sort of big changes that the party needs to compete effectively at the national, state, and local level?
So, I think that that's a complicated question, but it's one that
That's why I asked it.
I love a complicated question. I think that there is some level of hope that we should have there. And, the truth is that right now, the DNC is in the process of deciding its next slate of officers. You've got a series of folks who are running for DNC chair. You've got a very talented group of about 20 people who are running for vice chair. We've got folks who are coming out of the woodwork to run for other offices at the DNC. My good friend Tim Lim just announced that he's running for finance chair. My friend Artie Blanco, who I've been in the trenches with, is running for vice chair. I think that what a lot of folks are really understanding, and this is in stark contrast with what we saw in 2016, was that the Democratic Party, and specifically the DNC, need to have a role to play in this. In 2016, a lot of really great organizations kind of popped up and started doing things that traditionally the Democratic Party under the DNC used to do. Candidate recruitment and training and operative training. And there were all these sorts of things that like a bunch of different resistance groups started doing. And it was critically important work that I think had engaged a lot of young folks and a lot of new folks since 2016 in the process. But the problem with that framework is that the DNC kind of diminished. It became smaller. It took on less. It started to do less. And what we have now is a situation where the party itself and the party brand need some love and care and attention. I believe that coming out of the DNC leadership elections that are going to be taking place at the beginning of February, that we will see a rash of new young leaders who are going to start moving into these larger positions within the DNC. And I'm hopeful that they will be able to set a direction of reform that will move the party in the direction of what we're talking about, which is to get local again, which is to start reinvigorating our county level parties and our local Democratic clubs and our state Democratic committees, and to find young folks to step up and start running for these positions so that they can start playing active voices in their community as Democrats.
Okay. Let's let me ask you. No, we're going to take another break here because we're coming up to bring back our radio listeners. This is Deadline DC. My guest is Brad Bauman, progressive media strategist. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to our radio listeners. As you rejoin us after that commercial break, we're glad to have you. If you want to watch as well as listen to the show, you can watch us at twitter.com/Brad Bannon. You can also watch us on Facebook at facebook.com /deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos. And you can watch us on YouTube at youtube.com /@deadline DC. Our guest in this half hour is Brad Bauman, progressive media strategist and principal for the Raben Group. We're discussing how to deal with Donald Trump. Let me ask you this question, Brad. Uh, Between Election Day and where we are now, uh, people I've talked to and I see what they write on social media, there seems to be a group of Democrats and progressives who just basically resigned to their fate. This is so depressing and overwhelming that they really can't cope with it. And we're planning on moving to Canada, but now that it's going to be part of the United States, they can't do that anymore. Um, and probably a few of them were thinking of moving to Greenland too. So,
Not
so
an
now
option for
that's
us.
yeah. So my question to you: Are most Democrats ready to fight Trump, or are they resigned to their fates?
You know, Brad, we've got to be ready to fight. I'm often reminded in my mind of the of Donald Rumsfeld during the run up to 2002 and the Iraq War, a war that I know you and I were viciously opposed to. And, I canceled my New York Times subscription that long ago at this point and refused to ever return to it because of their stance on the war. But, I remember he said, you don't go to war with the army you want, you go to war with the army you have. And this is the army we have. It's up to us. It's up to all of us to find some faith, to find some hope, to channel the fact that what's on the line right now is America itself, is the America that we believe in, is the America that we were told existed. Those ideals, that democracy, the belief that everybody is equal under the law, and how we return to that, that's what's at stake right now. And like, if you can't fight for that, then yeah, I guess there's nothing left to fight for. But that's the fight that's being presented to us, and we got to do it. We have to be in it. And I know how depressing it is. I know how difficult it was. Look, I'm not a robot. I feel it too. It's sad. It's depressing. It feels like loss. But we are strong when we get together. We are strong when we fight together. And we have to step up now. This is our fight. This is the fight of our generation. This is the fight that's to come. And I know that folks might feel right now like all is lost, but you don't know what all is lost until all is actually lost. And we're not quite there yet. There's a lot that's happening on the state level. And I think that over the next year, we're going to see a lot happening on the state level that's going to challenge notions about what America can be. I think that the Band-Aid is ripped off now, and we have an opportunity to redefine what policies are coming up. And we have an opportunity to make places that have Democratic majorities into laboratories for democracy as we want to see them. And we have an opportunity to create new leaders, and we have an opportunity to save democracy. And that's the fight that's ahead of us. And we just need to put one foot in front of another here and do it.
Well, let me ask you this question. We talked in the first half hour, we talked about the Trump desire to come in with a bang, with shock and awe next week. Is that going to, and I think there's a lot of nasty stuff that's going to happen next Monday.
Yeah.
deportations of, lots of bad stuff. Is that going to energize Democrats or just make them more depressed than they already are now?
Well, I think that is up to us, Brad. That's up to me. It's up to you. It's up to your listeners. It's up to us to determine whether those around us are going to take this lying down or not. Yes, they're going to come in and they're going to try and shock and awe us. And that is designed to try and demoralize us, to keep us separated, to keep us apart, to alienate us, and to make us less able to resist, less able to stop, and less able to turn this country around. And we can't let them do that. We just can't.
Okay, well, let me ask you another question off that.
Sure.
Uh, Next week, again, I think, the Trump people are going for shock and awe. And we've talked about the structural needs you and I think the party needs to refresh itself, get younger. Let me ask you this. What can we do in the immediate future to fight some of the things that are coming down the pike next week?
We can show up in force. If there are events that are taking place locally, whether they're being put on by Indivisible or whether they're being put on by other national organizations or local organizations, show up. If folks need help painting signs that show where we stand on the issues, paint signs. If folks need to make phone calls to ensure that there are folks taken to the streets in your local neighborhoods, do it. Plug in, get ready, go. The more visible signs of resistance exist to what's going to happen next week, and the more resolve that we have to fight it, the more they're not going to be able to get away with. And we can't let setbacks stop us from that critical work. The media needs to see us out there. Our neighbors need to see us out there. Folks, our family and friends who don't think about politics all the time the way that I do and you do and your listeners do need to hear this. They need to know that we believe that this is wrong. And in the short term, us showing that and participating and actively being a part of our communities in order to do it is the most valuable thing that we can be doing in this most crucial period to register which direction we want our country to head.
Okay, you mentioned before that we are having and we are in the middle of the campaign for the new DNC, Democratic National Committee officers. I believe they already have had one electronic form. Could you tell us briefly about some of the candidates for DNC chair, who they
Yeah,
are?
yeah. So right now you have arguably two front runners for DNC chair. You've got the current chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party and the current chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, who bring different strengths and weaknesses to the race. Ben, the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, has done a tremendous job with building a party in the state that has been able to fight in Wisconsin in a way that we haven't seen in a while. Whereas Ken, the chairman of the Minnesota party, has done a fantastic job ensuring that boots on the ground across his state are really energized. And over the course of his tenure, has been able to build a Democratic trifecta in the state. Both candidates seem to be very committed to looking at kind of an old school, at this point, Dean strategy of a 50-state strategy. And I think the devil's really going to be in the details there in terms of, what they're bringing to the table, not just in terms of how they're going to fundraise for those state parties, resource those state parties, but also be the sort of attack dog that can really help rally the troops in the face of what we've got, of what Trump is going to be doing.
Okay. Thank you for that. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank you for joining the show again. I'm sure we'll have you on again because God knows there's going to be lots to talk about. But that's it for Deadline DC today. Our guest, I want to thank our guest in the first half hour, Mavinti Kaushal, the national political reporter for the Washington Examiner. And in this portion, Brad Bauman, progressive media strategist and principal of the Raben Group. We'll be back next week to talk more about the opening days of the Trump administration. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.